scientists didn't discover the God particle, they discovered something much worse. Scientists have been experimenting on something many people are considering the continuation of the atomic bomb. And what they're working on is sparking rumors that they could potentially create a black hole that could swallow Earth, open portals to alternate dimensions, and even open a portal to a spiritual realm. This is the work of the scientific lab called Cern. Their goal is to try and recreate the beginning of the universe. And they've already discovered a new particle that they call the God particle. In this video, we're going to be looking at a biblical parallel that warns against a situation just like this and how a spooky human ritual sacrifice is oddly connected to Cern. But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan. This channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. If you're new here or if you're not new here, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. There's a huge percentage of the people who watch this channel, unfortunately, are not subscribed. All right, let's jump into the video. Okay, so we first have to get an understanding of what Cern is. This is a fairly good video from the BBC that kind of summarizes the entire operation of what they're attempting to do. Ultimately, it's the European Organization for Nuclear Research. Remember that word nuclear research for later in the video. Founded in 1954 to unite scientists that now encompasses 21 European states and 10,000 scientists from 100 countries. But it studies the components of matter using the 8 billion euro Big Bang machine. Okay, the Large Hadron Collider. So this 27-kilometer particle accelerator where protons travel close to the speed of light is basically their attempt to recreate the beginning of the universe. There are tens of millions of collisions happening each second. These conditions recreate the very first moments of the universe. So first of all, let's just acknowledge how much effort these scientists have to put in to try and recreate the beginning of the universe without acknowledging that it probably took something outside of our world to do all of this stuff. Look at all the tech spent, look at all the money spent, look at all the mind spent just to recreate this particle that they're calling the God particle to try and emulate the Big Bang. Might just be directly and overtly pointing to a creator, if you ask me. But their experiments don't come without concerns, as I initially mentioned, with many criticizing that this eerily parallels to something called the Manhattan Project, which is the creation of the atomic bomb. Let's take a look at this clip from Johnny Harris that summarizes what the creation of the atomic bomb actually meant for society and the world as we know it.
Let me take you back to July 16, 1945. On this day, a team of nuclear engineers detonated the world's first nuclear device ever, right here in New Mexico. It's hard to overstate this moment. This moment ended an era and started a new one. 21 days later, a US bomber flew over a city in southern Japan with one of these bombs in its belly, and it dropped it from 30,000 feet above the ground. The bomb dropped for 43 seconds before exploding a few hundred meters above the ground, turning this city into dust. This was the first time that a nuclear weapon had ever been used to kill humans. And 3 days later, the US dropped another one on another city in Japan. 360,000 people, most of them civilians, dead from these attacks. Jeez. The president at the time, Harry Truman, was on a ship crossing the Atlantic from Europe, his voice broadcasting across the world.
An American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT.
The nuclear era had begun, and soon the Soviet Union was developing a bomb of their own. It became a race.
So the creation of the atomic bomb and the mass destruction that it caused, primarily on civilian populations, would have us looking back in hindsight and acknowledging how heavy it is. And this idea of technology being able to create so much damage, so much carnage, so much heartbreak is explored in the movie Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer follows the story of the scientist who ultimately developed the technology to create the atomic bomb and ultimately his moral struggle throughout the entire process. And the entire movie is beautifully summarized in one of these final scenes where Oppenheimer is talking to Albert Einstein. He approaches Albert Einstein and he says to him, "Hey, remember when I told you that the calculations could potentially cause this situation to destroy the entire world?" He goes on to say, after this is already complete, he thinks it has.
I believe we did.
And the rest of the scene plays out of different nuclear bombs hitting and destroying the rest of the earth. Now, before we get into a very interesting biblical parallel, what I find interesting is that upon doing research for this video, we found a statue to the Hindu god Shiva on the campus of the Cern research lab. Oddly enough, Shiva is the Hindu god of destruction. And some of you guys might be thinking, oh, Ruslan, you're overreacting. It's just beautiful art. Well, maybe that's true until there was a leaked footage of a bizarre human sacrifice ritual on campus that was caught on camera. Check this out. So they're all wearing the Illuminati hoods. They're all gathering around. There's the same little statue of the Hindu god for destruction. And so this is happening on Cern's campus. They approach that person. That person then ends up falling to their knees. Another person falls down. And I'm not saying this is a literal human sacrifice, but it is a ritual emulating a human sacrifice. Very weird and spooky stuff, to say the least. These folks all got up, cosplayed in these hoods and these outfits, and decided to do this bizarre ritual on the campus where they're in front of Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction, while trying to recreate what happened at the beginning of the universe. And the most bizarre part is that Cern's explanation for this, or I guess you could call it an explanation for this, was that, well, this was really just a prank. No other reasoning for why something like this would happen at a multi-billion-dollar facility experimenting with recreating the Big Bang and the beginning of the universe. Now, this entire situation eerily parallels what we see happen in one of the earliest stories in the Bible. And the contrast of this is directly spoken by Jesus. So let's go to Genesis chapter 11. Some of you guys may be familiar with this, some of you not, but this is the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and make them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their languages so that they will not understand each other." So these people are attempting to build this massive tower so they can make a name for themselves. And God comes and scatters. He acknowledges their human potential for doing something big, but then he knows that that human potential to build their own tower, to build their own castle, is actually not good for humanity as a whole. So he scatters them, he confuses their language. In verse 8 it says, "So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth." So the issue here is that people are using their God-given potential to build their own castle and make a name for themselves. This is warned against all throughout the scripture, but specifically in the book of James, chapter 3, verse 13. It says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and evil practice." And then he juxtaposed this in verse 17. He says, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace and reap a harvest of righteousness." So we see this juxtaposition that when you are ambitious for yourself, that when you're after building your own kingdom to try and get to heaven, you're trying to level yourself up, that ultimately causes destruction. But true wisdom that comes from heaven is the opposite of that. True wisdom causes us to seek after God, to build his kingdom, to live sacrificial lives instead of selfish lives, to not build our own castle, but build God's kingdom. Jesus drives home this point in Matthew chapter 6, where he talks about all the worries of this life and all the issues that we're going through, and that God ultimately knows our hearts and knows our needs and is there to provide for us. And in Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, he says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." It's interesting that throughout the narrative of Scripture that we see this human potential to do some incredible things, yet we often see that human potential distorted and perverted to do evil with. That for some reason, when humans start to accomplish things, they get puffed up and they start doing things to harm each other and themselves. This is what happens when we try to build our castle. But when we actually get wisdom from heaven, when we actually get a hold of God's ways, then we take our ambitions, we take our desires, we take those things to do something great, and we don't try to do them in our name and to make ourselves famous and to make a name that's great for us. We actually use them to further God's kingdom instead of our castle. All of a sudden, good things start to happen. All of a sudden, we could be the hands and feet of Jesus. All of a sudden, we could use our time, talent, and treasure to further God's goodness and beauty on this side of eternity. So what does earthly selfish ambition looks like? It looks like creating the atomic bomb to cause mass destruction and potentially destroy the world. It looks like trying to build a tower to reach heaven. It looks like us trying to discover the beginning of the universe instead of giving the creator of the universe his just due reverence and respect. But don't think this is just about billion-dollar agencies and scientists playing with particles. This also applies to you and me. Are we after trying to do things for our own glory or God's glory? Are we after our own selfish ambitions and plans, or are we submitted to God's heart and God's ways of doing things on this side of eternity? And so much of this has to do with us first getting a grip of God's plan and God's purpose for our life right now. If you'd like to learn more about that, check out our playlist on how to discover your purpose now. It's pinned right over here, all right? I'll see you over there. Peace.